Some songs hit once, hit hard, and then the artist behind them simply vanished from the charts forever. The 1970s were full of moments like that. Tracks that owned the radio for a summer and then disappeared. Here are 12 one-hit wonders from the 1970s only Gen X remember. Number 12, Seasons in the Sun by Terry Jacks, 1974.
We had joy, we had fun, we had seasons in the sun.
Terry Jacks was a Canadian singer-songwriter who had been working in the music industry for several years without any significant breakthrough when Seasons in the Sun came along in 1974. The song was an English-language adaptation of a French song by Jacques Brel, originally titled Le Moribond, with English lyrics written by poet and lyricist Rod McEwen. It tells the story of a dying man saying goodbye to the people in his life, his father, his best friend, his wife, a deeply melancholic subject that somehow became one of the biggest pop hits of its era. The single reached number 1 in the United States in February 1974 and stayed there for 3 weeks. It also hit the top spot in Canada and the United Kingdom, making it a genuine international phenomenon. Worldwide sales in the weeks following its release were extraordinary.
Goodbye, my friend, it's hard to die.
At its commercial peak, it was moving roughly 1 million copies a week across global markets. Jacks had originally planned to record the song with the Beach Boys, having played it for them during a meeting, but the collaboration never materialized and he ended up recording it himself. That decision turned out to be one of the more consequential ones of his professional life. He never came close to repeating it. Follow-up singles throughout 1974 and 1975, including another Brel adaptation called If You Go Away, found no meaningful chart traction. Jacks eventually stepped back from recording entirely and moved into production work and environmental activism based in British Columbia. Seasons in the Sun remained the singular commercial moment of his recording career, a song so emotionally direct and so widely distributed that it was inescapable for a few months. And then the man who sang it quietly moved on to other things.
All our lives we had fun, we had seasons in the sun.
Number 11, Convoy by C.W. McCall, 1975. Convoy arrived in late 1975, riding the wave of CB radio culture that had swept across the United States during the middle of the decade. Truckers had adopted Citizens Band radio as a way to communicate on the road, warn each other about speed traps, and coordinate during the 1973 oil crisis fuel shortages. The CB radio slang that developed in that world, breaker breaker, smoky, bear in the air, had started filtering into mainstream American pop culture, and Convoy put it all to music. C.W. McCall was actually a character. The real person behind the name was Bill Fries, an advertising executive from Omaha, Nebraska, who had developed the C.W. McCall persona for a regional bread company commercial campaign. The character caught on with audiences, which led Fries and his collaborator Chip Davis, who would later go on to found Mannheim Steamroller, to record actual music under the name. Their earlier single, Wolf Creek Pass, had found some success on the country charts, but nothing prepared anyone for what Convoy would do.
Come on and join our convoy, ain't nothing gonna get in our way.
Released in late 1975, Convoy reached number 1 on both the country and pop charts simultaneously in January 1976, a crossover achievement that few acts managed in that era. The song is built around CB radio slang, truckers communicating with each other about law enforcement, road conditions, and the mechanics of moving a convoy of 18-wheelers across the country. Fries performed it in the drawling, character-driven voice of a trucker, and the novelty of the language and the setting made it immediately distinctive. The song inspired a 1978 theatrical film of the same name, directed by Sam Peckinpah and starring Chris Christopherson and Ali McGraw. It also triggered a wave of CB radio-themed novelty records from other artists attempting to replicate the formula, none of which found significant success. Neither did C.W. McCall on the pop charts. Fries released additional albums through the late 1970s, but never cracked the mainstream again. He eventually stepped away from the music business entirely, returned to Colorado, and was elected mayor of Ouray, a small mountain town, a role he held for several years. The CB craze faded as quickly as it had arrived, and it took the chart success with it. Fries, for his part, seemed entirely at peace with that outcome.
You want to back off them hogs? 10-4, about 5 miles or so.
Number 10, Afternoon Delight by Starland Vocal Band, 1976. The Starland Vocal Band was a Washington, D.C.-based quartet consisting of Bill Danoff, Taffy Nivert, John Carroll, and Margot Chapman. Danoff and Nivert had co-written Take Me Home, Country Roads with John Denver several years earlier, and they had credibility in the folk pop world. But nothing in their background quite prepared anyone for what Afternoon Delight would do in the summer of 1976. The song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in July 1976 and stayed there for 2 weeks. It was inescapable on AM radio that summer. The group won the Grammy Award for Best New Artist at the 1977 ceremony, beating out nominees that included the Boston band that had just released their debut album. That Grammy win, in retrospect, became something of a sore subject. Boston went on to sell tens of millions of records, while the Starland Vocal Band faded from view almost immediately.
And everything's a little clearer in the light of day.
They were given their own summer variety television show by CBS in 1977, which was canceled after 6 episodes, a short run that did nothing for their momentum and may have exposed them to criticism they weren't in a position to absorb so soon after their peak. Follow-up singles found no audience, and the group's profile dropped sharply. By the end of the decade, the band had effectively dissolved, and Danoff and Nivert's marriage, which had been the creative and personal partnership at the center of the band, ended as well. Danoff has remained active as a songwriter over the years, and his credits include work that spans decades. But the Starland Vocal Band as a functioning act barely outlasted the summer that made them famous. Afternoon Delight has endured in pop culture, partially through ironic affection in later decades, but the people who made it moved on, or were moved on by circumstance not long after.
Afternoon Delight.
Number 9, Brandy, You're a Fine Girl by Looking Glass, 1972. Looking Glass was a rock band from New Brunswick, New Jersey, that had formed while its members were students at Rutgers University in the late 1960s. They had been playing clubs and building a following in the New York and New Jersey area for several years when Brandy, You're a Fine Girl was released in the summer of 1972. The song is a straightforward story about a barmaid in a port town who loves a sailor who can never stay. His heart, as the song tells it, belongs to the sea. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in August 1972 and spent a single week at the top. The song was written by Elliot Lurie, the band's guitarist and lead vocalist. Lurie has said in interviews that he wrote it quickly, the melody and lyrics coming together in a short session, without any expectation that it would become the enduring piece of radio pop it turned out to be.
And there's a girl in this harbor town, and she...
The song has held up remarkably well over the decades. It appeared prominently in the 2018 film Bohemian Rhapsody during a party scene, a placement that introduced it to a generation who had no frame of reference for Looking Glass at all and sent streams of the song spiking upward nearly 5 decades after it was recorded. The band released follow-up singles and a second album, but nothing came close to the momentum of Brandy. They broke up in 1974. Lurie moved into film and television scoring and worked steadily behind the scenes in Hollywood for decades, composing music for productions that reached large audiences who would never know his name. The other members pursued various musical paths with limited commercial success. Brandy outlived the band by 50 years and kept finding new listeners, a fate most one-hit wonders never get. Number 8, Patches by Clarence Carter, 1970. Clarence Carter was an Alabama-born rhythm and blues singer who had been recording for Atlantic Records since the late 1960s and had achieved modest success on the R&B charts. Carter was blind from early childhood, and his vocal delivery carried a directness and emotional weight that set him apart from more polished soul contemporaries. Patches was released in 1970 and crossed over from the R&B market to become a genuine mainstream hit, reaching number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and topping the R&B chart. The song tells the story of a boy growing up in poverty in rural Alabama. Patches is the name of the family farm, and his dying father's request that he take care of the family and not let the land go. It is a stark, plain-spoken piece of storytelling with almost no ornamentation. And Carter's deep, weathered voice gave it an authenticity that connected with a wide audience far beyond the R&B market it had originated in. He won the Grammy Award for Best Rhythm and Blues Song at the 1971 ceremony. Carter continued to record and perform throughout the 1970s and beyond, maintaining a strong and loyal presence on the Southern soul circuit. He was genuinely respected within the genre and had a dedicated following among R&B listeners who kept up with his output. But Patches was his only time in the national pop spotlight. His later recordings, including Slip Away and Too Weak to Fight, were well regarded by R&B fans, but never crossed over the way Patches had. He continued performing well into his later years as a working musician, with one enormous moment that most of the mainstream had long since forgotten was his. Number 7, Playground in My Mind by Clint Holmes, 1973.
My name is Michael, I got a nickel.
Clint Holmes was a singer born in Bournemouth, England, who had grown up in upstate New York and built a career as a lounge and cabaret performer. Playground in My Mind was released in 1972 and became a hit in 1973, climbing to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. It featured a child's voice, a young boy named Philip Oldham, singing portions of the song alongside Holmes, which gave it a novelty quality that was completely of its moment. Holmes had a warm, polished tenor and genuine performing instincts, and Playground in My Mind suited his style well. The song's sound, light, breezy, and deliberately uncomplicated, caught radio programmers in a particular mood that year, and it sold well through the spring and summer of 1973. It spent several weeks in the top 5 and became a fixture on AM radio during that stretch.
I'm gonna buy me all kinds of candy.
The pop market, however, was not interested in what he did next. Subsequent singles failed to chart meaningfully, and Holmes returned to his work in live performance and cabaret. He built a long, successful career in Las Vegas, performing regularly at major venues over several decades and earning a strong reputation as a live entertainer among audiences who appreciated that kind of show. Holmes has spoken in interviews about the strange relationship he carries with a song that most people remember, but few people connect to him by name. Audiences at his Las Vegas shows recognized him warmly but the broader public had no idea who had recorded the song they remembered from childhood radio. He built a real career in live performance while Playground in My Mind floated through decades of oldies radio, detached from the person behind it in the minds of almost everyone who ever heard it.
That's what I'm gonna do.
Number 6, The Night Chicago Died by Paper Lace, 1974.
Daddy was a cop on the east side of Chicago.
Paper Lace was a British pop group from Nottingham that had originally won a spot on the talent competition television show Opportunity Knocks in the early 1970s. They recorded Billy Don't Be a Hero in early 1974, which became a major hit in the United Kingdom. An American cover version by Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods actually beat them to number 1 in the United States. So when Paper Lace released The Night Chicago Died, they needed it to land on their own terms. It did. The song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in August 1974, making Paper Lace the rare act to chart at the top on both sides of the Atlantic within the same year.
When the town of Chicago died.
The song tells a fictional story about a Chicago police shootout with Al Capone's gang, told from the perspective of a boy whose father is a cop. It has no basis in any actual historical event, which did not slow its popularity in the slightest. Paper Lace never charted significantly in the United States again. They continued recording and performing in the United Kingdom and maintained a presence on the British nostalgia touring circuit for years. But the American pop audience that had briefly embraced them moved on almost immediately. The Night Chicago Died remained one of those songs that triggered vivid memories in people who were teenagers in 1974. But almost no one could tell you who sang it without looking it up.
Yes, indeed.
Number 5, Feelings by Morris Albert, 1975.
Feelings.
Morris Albert was a Brazilian singer whose real name is Mauricio Alberto Kaiserman. He had written and recorded Feelings in Portuguese as Sentimentos before re-recording it in English for international release. The English version was released in 1974 in Brazil and reached international markets in 1975, climbing to number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and becoming a significant adult contemporary hit across multiple countries, including the United States, Canada, and several European markets. The song was an elaborate, orchestrated ballad of romantic loss, the kind of sweeping, emotionally direct pop that found a large audience in the mid-1970s on adult contemporary radio. Radio programmers at the time had an appetite for this kind of material, and Feelings landed squarely in that space. It was heard constantly through that period on stations targeting adult listeners.
For my life, I'll feel it.
It was covered an extraordinary number of times by other artists, including Nina Simone, Ella Fitzgerald, and Shirley Bassey, which gave it a life well beyond Albert's own recording. The song became a standard in certain performance contexts, particularly in lounge and cabaret settings, which meant it circulated through popular culture long after Albert's own commercial moment had passed. Albert returned to Brazil and continued his career there with considerably more longevity than his international chart presence suggested. He recorded and performed for an audience that remained genuinely interested in him through the following decades. He returned to the United States periodically for nostalgia-oriented performances and appearances. But Feelings was the only time his name appeared on an international pop chart, and most people in North America who remember the song have no idea he was Brazilian, or that he built a sustained career long after the rest of the world had moved on from that one summer of radio ubiquity. Number 4, Hocus Pocus by Focus, 1973. Focus was a Dutch progressive rock band led by guitarist Jan Akkerman and vocalist and keyboardist Thijs van Leer. They had been building a devoted following in Europe through the early 1970s with a sound that blended rock, jazz, and classical elements in ways that had no obvious precedent in contemporary pop. Their 1971 album Moving Waves was well received in Europe, and Hocus Pocus, a track from that album, was released as an edited single in the United States in 1973, reaching number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song is genuinely unlike anything else that appeared on American radio in that era. It features Van Leer alternating between yodeling, operatic wailing, and wordless vocal outbursts, while Ackerman delivers ferocious, technically demanding guitar work. The track pivots through dramatic tempo changes and dynamic shifts, moving from quiet passages to explosive peaks without any of the structural predictability that radio programmers typically preferred. On paper, it had no business being a hit. On the radio, it simply was one. The American chart success brought Focus a level of international visibility they had not previously enjoyed, and they toured the United States to enthusiastic crowds. But the timing was complicated. Ackerman had already been expressing dissatisfaction with the band's direction before the American breakthrough arrived, and internal tensions were never far from the surface. Ackerman departed in 1976, and the band continued in various configurations under Van Leer's leadership through subsequent decades, reforming multiple times. They never had another American chart hit. Hocus Pocus remains one of the most genuinely strange songs to ever crack the American top 10. And for listeners who encountered it on the radio without any context, sitting in a car or a living room in 1973, it left an impression that was difficult to forget and equally difficult to explain. Number 3. Billy Don't Be a Hero by Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods, 1974. Bo Donaldson and the Haywoods were a Cincinnati-based pop group who had their moment in the summer of 1974 with their cover of Billy Don't Be a Hero. The song had been written by Mitch Murray and Peter Callender and originally recorded by Paper Lace in Britain, where it had been a chart success earlier in 1974. The Haywoods' American version reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in June 1974 and stayed there for 2 weeks. The song tells the story of a young soldier who volunteers for a dangerous mission despite his fiance's pleas to stay safe. He doesn't come back. It arrived at a moment when American audiences were still processing the final stages of the Vietnam War and its anti-war sentiment. Quiet and personal rather than confrontational, connected with the public mood in a way that more explicitly political music sometimes did not. Donaldson and the Haywoods released several follow-up singles through 1974 and 1975, including Who Do You Think You Are? But none of them found significant chart success. The group was largely inactive by the end of the decade. Donaldson has done occasional reunion performances and nostalgia circuit appearances over the years, but the band's commercial existence was essentially contained within a single calendar year. Billy Don't Be a Hero was the whole story. Billy, don't be a hero, come back to me. Number 2, The Streak by Ray Stevens, 1974. He ain't wearing no clothes. Oh, yes, they call him the Streak. Ray Stevens had been a working comedian and novelty songwriter in Nashville since the early 1960s. He had scored a number 1 hit in 1969 with Guitarzan, and a genuine pop hit with Everything Is Beautiful in 1970, which reached number 1 and won the Grammy for Best Male Pop Vocal Performance. By 1974, he was a known quantity in Nashville, a skilled craftsman with a strong sense of comic timing, but not a dominant force on the pop charts. Then streaking happened. The fad of running naked through public places swept American college campuses in early 1974, generating extensive news coverage and a public reaction that ranged from amused to deeply offended. Streakers appeared at major sporting events, college graduation ceremonies, and even the Academy Awards telecast in March 1974, where a man named Robert Opel ran behind presenter David Niven during the live broadcast. Stevens wrote and recorded The Streak in response, and the timing was precise. Released in March 1974, the song reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 by May and stayed there for 3 weeks. It was the best-selling single in the United States for the entire year of 1974, which is a remarkable distinction for a novelty record. Stevens framed the song as gently comic and inoffensive. The narrator is a man being repeatedly interrupted during an on-street interview by a passing streaker, with his wife providing shocked reactions. The humor was broad, clean, and accessible to the widest possible audience. That accessibility, combined with the perfect timing of its release relative to the cultural moment, made it a genuine phenomenon. Streaking peaked, the song peaked with it, and while Stevens went on to have a long and successful career in country comedy and remained a beloved live performer for decades, he never returned to the top of the pop charts. The Streak was his last pop #1, a song born from 10 days of cultural absurdity that turned out to be exactly what people wanted to hear.
Where you go?
#1, Kung Fu Fighting by Carl Douglas, 1974.
Everybody was kung fu fighting.
In 1974, martial arts had become a mainstream American cultural obsession. Bruce Lee's films, Enter the Dragon, had been released in 1973, shortly before his death, had introduced kung fu to a mass Western audience. Television was reflecting the trend with Kung Fu, the series starring David Carradine. Martial arts schools were opening in suburban strip malls across the country, and the whole phenomenon was still at its peak when Carl Douglas walked into a London recording studio. Douglas was a Jamaican-born singer who had been living and working in Britain, struggling to find commercial traction despite years of effort. He had recorded Kung Fu Fighting essentially as a B-side, a quick throwaway track written in about 10 minutes to fill out a recording session. It was put on the flip side of a different single. Then someone at the label heard it and moved it to the A-side. The song reached #1 in the United Kingdom in October 1974 and #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States in November of the same year. It stayed at the top of the American charts for 2 weeks and sold millions of copies worldwide, eventually more than 11 million. It became one of the best-selling singles of the entire decade. Douglas released follow-up material, but nothing connected. The disco era arrived and offered new possibilities, and he released material aimed at that market as well, again, without significant commercial success. He continued performing on the international circuit for years, always opening with Kung Fu Fighting, always closing with it, always answering questions about a song that took 10 minutes to write and defined 4 decades of performing. There is something both remarkable and quietly absurd about that. A song so casual in its creation, so enormous in its reach, and so absolute in the way it became the only thing a capable performer is ever remembered for. The 1970s were full of songs that arrived without warning, took over the radio, and then vanished along with the people who made them. Some of those artists went on to long careers that the pop charts never reflected. Others genuinely had just the one moment. Some moved into entirely different fields. Some kept performing for decades on stages the mainstream never saw. Either way, the song stayed. On oldies stations, in film soundtracks, in the back of memory for anyone who was alive and listening when those songs were everywhere. If this brought back a few of those memories, hit the like button and subscribe. There's plenty more where this came from.